was HIV, and that she hoped I wouldn't print this because the girl was so devastated and she was so devastated, and she was determined to do everything she could to save this girl's life.
In September 1985, 53-year-old Elizabeth Taylor announced the organization of the American Foundation for AIDS Research, better known as AMFAR. But nothing could save Rock Hudson. Tragically, the actor died on October 2, 1985, at age 52. Heartsick, Taylor stepped up her efforts to raise awareness in the Hollywood community and beyond about a ravaging and misunderstood disease.
She's probably done more to fight AIDS than any single person I can think of outside of medical research. And I think it all goes back to Rock Hudson. So when the AIDS virus hit big, well, naturally she went out and fought for it, when it was very unpopular to do so.
On May 9, 1985, 53-year-old Elizabeth Taylor brought her crusade to the nation's capital, where she pleaded with a congressional subcommittee for increased funding in the war against AIDS. Taylor knew it was a tough sell.
The Reagan administration barely mentioned the word, if it ever did mention the word, whereas Liz was out there campaigning, trying to educate people as to how AIDS was transmitted, how it could be combated, and what needed to be done to overcome this medical catastrophe.
The screen legend turned AIDS activist opened a lot of eyes in Washington. When she returned to Hollywood, Elizabeth was anxious to get back to acting. In late May 1985, Taylor accepted a role in the made-for-TV film There Must Be a Pony with longtime friend Robert Wagner. The film's director, Joseph Sargent, expected trouble, but he found Elizabeth Taylor was rarely predictable.
I had a lot of misgivings because I'd heard that, she was always late. She could be difficult. And on the first day of rehearsal, in walks this absolutely ravishing vision. I certainly didn't expect to see her looking so gorgeous. She was at the peak of her form, both physically and mentally and psychologically, and she was ready to work.
Elizabeth was not only ready to get back to acting, but people suffering from AIDS remained a priority. And on March 3, 1987, 55-year-old Taylor was named National Chairwoman of AMFAR. Later that month, Elizabeth began work on another television movie, Poker Alice. The film also starred George Hamilton and Tom Skerritt, who quickly fell prey to Taylor's charm and wit.
We were going to have a read-through, and she was an hour and a half late in her own house for this read-through. And I had been told up front, I said, don't expect Elizabeth to be right on the hour. She's going to be late. Elizabeth, when she came in, she looked beautiful and graceful. And she came out and said, all right, what the hell are we doing here? Why have I been waiting for you for so long? And she gets into self-mockery, And just right off the bat, you're disarmed and you love this person. You say, okay, this is going to be a good time.
Skerritt admired the skills from a bygone era, which Taylor brought to the set.
That's, I think, what the old studio system still brings to our business. Our business largely has lost its sense of fun and enjoyment. And the studio system had all of that. And I think what Elizabeth personifies most is that aspect of the old studio system.
Taylor's busy film career and her demanding role in the fight against AIDS left her with little free time. Yet, despite the hectic schedule, Elizabeth embarked on a new business venture. In May 1987, she launched her first fragrance, Elizabeth Taylor's Passion. Taylor took an active role in developing just the right scent and in packaging and promoting the product. Passion went on to become one of the top 5 best-selling fragrances of all time. By January 1988, 55-year-old Elizabeth Taylor slimmed down to 122 pounds, regaining the trim figure of her youth. She then hit the road on yet another new venture to promote Elizabeth Takes Off, an inspirational book about her struggles with weight loss. For a time, Taylor appeared to be in good health, but she was in constant pain from old injuries and consuming pills to fight the effects. By September of 1988, she regained the pounds she fought so hard to lose.
She was seeing 3 different doctors at the same time. None of them knew about the existence of the other, and each of them was prescribing very strenuous medication for her. I mean, you're talking about, like 21 different pills at the same time, and you're not talking about one pill a day. You're talking about 30, 40, 50 pills a day.
In December 1988, Taylor entered the Betty Ford Treatment Center for the second time for her addiction to prescription painkillers. During this stay, however, Elizabeth found more than top-notch treatment. She met a new man. Larry Fortensky, a native of Southern California, entered the Betty Ford Center to deal with his alcohol addiction. But Fortensky was an unlikely match for Elizabeth. At 36, he was 20 years younger than Taylor, and he was a carpenter by trade.
Oh, he had that kind of rough edge to him that she had, but the rough edge that Richard Burton and Ike Todd had was certainly not the rough edge that Larry Fortensky had. I mean, Larry Fortensky was rough, but he had none of the saving graces that Burton and Mike Todd had.
Taylor seemed unconcerned by Fortensky's blue-collar background.
He wasn't subjected to her as a movie star, except subliminally. And yes, I think she thought that, it was a real coming together of people with mutual interests in staying sober.
After Taylor and Fortensky left the Betty Ford Center in January 1989, they remained friends, sharing a commitment to sobriety.
I think the second cure took, and I've heard that she's still dry to this day, and I mean, she made a decision to live.
Taylor also made a decision to expand her business empire. In the spring of 1989, Elizabeth launched White Diamonds, the second in a series of highly successful signature fragrances. Taylor was instrumental in the promotion of White Diamonds, but always on her own terms.
You got to remember, she's been using the media since she was 11 years old. I mean, she's always been a movie star, and she's always been having to deal with the press.
In July 1989, at age 57, Elizabeth Taylor resumed her acting career in an adaptation of the Tennessee Williams play, Sweet Bird of Youth. The television movie featured the role of a fading screen star, and executive producer Linda Yellen knew Taylor was perfect for the part.
Well, Sweet Bird of Youth was something I felt should be done at that time because it was about facing aging with pride and dignity and appreciation. And Tennessee wondered if anyone would totally believe that this was about a woman who'd been the greatest star in the world. And our first and only choice was Elizabeth Taylor.
Taylor also understood the complexities in the character of Alexandra Delago.
His writing was always not reality, but a kind of heightened reality, a lyrical reality. And she's one of the few actresses who somehow made it totally believable and totally real. When you heard her speak it was just in character. She understood what his rhythms were about.
Despite her hectic shooting schedule on the film, Elizabeth found time for her favorite carpenter. In October of 1989, Larry Fortensky moved into Taylor's Bel Air estate while trying to maintain a life of his own.
Fortensky at first was his own man. I mean, he packed a lunch pail and went off to work on a construction job, He wasn't Mr. Elizabeth Taylor.
Fortensky soon found that being his own man was not easy.
He had a good heart, but he hated the Hollywood scene. He didn't like her friends. Roddy McDowell wouldn't talk to Larry Fortensky, nor Fortensky to McDowell. She tried to mold him into a Hollywood figure.
Despite their obvious differences, Fortensky and Taylor became husband and wife on October 5th, 1991. Taylor's good friend, singer Michael Jackson, hosted the ceremony at his Neverland Ranch in Santa Ynez Valley, California. Predictably, the event attracted a swarm of reporters.
She was really happy that night, and she looked beautiful as Michael Jackson brought her out of the house and walked down to the place where, of course, you couldn't hear anything because it was like Vietnam overhead. There were so many helicopters, and a guy jumped out of one of them and landed about 10 feet away from me. So there was a lot of hoopla during the wedding. Nobody heard a word of the wedding service.
Fortensky heard enough to become Elizabeth Taylor's seventh husband. In typical Taylor fashion, she used the event to raise funds for a new initiative, the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. The devastating illness that hit so close to home was now her greatest passion.
And I said, why don't you let me cover this, and why don't we try selling it, see if we can raise money for charity. And her Brits took the pictures, and they were sold to people and then all around the world, and they did make a lot of money.
Less than 5 months later, on February 27, 1992, Elizabeth celebrated her 60th birthday in grand style at Disneyland.
Everybody in Hollywood was there, you know, and Elizabeth and Larry Fortensky didn't come till late, and then they got on one of the rides and just waved at everybody. All our friends were there, you know, Roddy McDowell and Margaret O'Brien, a lot of people from the early days at MGM.
In October 1992, Taylor took her tireless fundraising efforts on the road to Chicago, where she appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and then to New York City for a benefit concert in Madison Square Garden. The concert raised more than $6 million to battle AIDS. In March 1993, Taylor's distinguished acting career and her selfless compassion for others were honored with 2 prestigious awards: the American Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award and the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award.
She's not just doing it to keep her name in the headlines. She understands the power of the name, the power of the celebrity. If you're a celebrity, you have to use it to give back. Otherwise, you're just using it inappropriately. It becomes an ego thing. There, it's not ego. It's something more than that.
But Taylor could not avoid her own health problems, and in March 1994, at age 62, Elizabeth underwent surgery to replace a hip. Within weeks, Taylor was back on her feet and ready to resume acting, but film roles were increasingly hard to come by.
I think she is a great survivor, but more than a survivor. She would manage to change horses in midstream. She was still a big movie star, but she was historic, and there weren't roles and parts for her. And I guess because she's not such a good bet health-wise, that made it even more difficult.
In 1994, Taylor landed a role playing Fred Flintstone's mother-in-law, Pearl Slaghoople, in the classic cartoon series Brought to Life. But there was one string attached.
The only thing she's done was that comic turn in the Flintstones. She just did that for fun, and because they promised her they'd do all the premieres for AIDS, and they did.
In the summer of 1994, Elizabeth suffered another painful loss when her mother, Sarah Taylor, died at age 99 in her home at Rancho Mirage, California. Mrs. Taylor was laid to rest alongside her husband Francis in Los Angeles on September 11, 1994. Less than a year later, Elizabeth underwent 2 additional hip replacement surgeries, but the painful setbacks were only temporary.
She's had extraordinary health problems for decades, and part of her image as a survivor, and I think in the popular mind she's very much known as a survivor, is because she has surmounted all of these physical catastrophes. She now walks with some difficulty because of hip replacements, but yet she walks. Yes, she's not the way she used to be, and yes, she's had all these physical problems, but she's still there. She's still allowing herself to be seen. There's no question of the fact that she's a very powerful woman.
Taylor's health problems put added strain on her 4.5-year marriage to Larry Fortensky, a relationship many believed was doomed from the start.
being married to Elizabeth Taylor, even the recovered alcoholic movie star, in the end was